Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Jackie Wong, and I'm really happy to be here with the Community Engaged Research Initiative at Simon Fraser University. We're also known as CERi for short, and really thankful for all of your presence here today. We're so happy to see the variety of folks on this list, and many of whom are familiar faces to us here at CERi. As we begin our time together, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the land that we're on. CERi is headquartered on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And we're located at just the foot of Main Street near Main and Hastings in the downtown east side, which is not too far from where I am right now in my apartment, a little ways up the street. When we think about the land and our connection to the land here, I'm really reflecting a lot right now about the connectedness of all things and the way that all beings are connected, particularly in this time and particularly at this moment of the pandemic. And when I think about where we're headed and how we might find our way out of this, I think very much about how we can look to the ancestral wisdom that exists and the Indigenous knowledge that exists here that has carried people through so many moments of struggle and which continue to be systematically and systemically marginalized and erased. And I'm really curious about how we can bring that knowledge and those voices to the center in more fulsome ways that not only center voices of Indigenous folks, but also work towards the social justice that I think a lot of us are really striving towards, especially now. I wanted to start our time together in a good way. So I'll go to the next slide about our community agreements that explore a little bit about what our time is going to be like here together. So this session is being recorded and it will be posted later on CERi's website and social media channels for folks who can't attend live with us today. And in Zoom, I know everybody is in infinite Zoom meetings in their lives. And this webinar is a little bit different than other Zoom gatherings. This is just a context in which you can see me, you can see the speakers and the other panelists, but we can't see you. And also audience members can't see each other. So especially in this context, I really encourage and invite folks to gather here in a spirit of mutual support and respect for each other. And I would love to hear from you. Elaine has already come in and said hello from where they are. And I really would love to encourage folks to introduce themselves in the chat box if they would like to. I also invite folks to please consider submitting questions to us through the Q&A function below and not the chat, as we will be monitoring the chat for conversation, but not questions. So would love to have you send those when you can. But in the meantime, I'm just going to add a little prompt in the chat box for everybody to introduce themselves if they wish. We're here for a pretty tight hour, just for 60 minutes today. So I also, as we go into this conversation, I really want to emphasize that we are gathering here in a context of real diversity. People are tuning in from all over the country, across North America. There's some friends in the United States who are here as well. And I really want to acknowledge the diverse learning journeys that we're on. We're listening to learn rather than to react or to respond. So we're kind of, setting aside our Twitter energy and bringing something else into this room. And since we're just here for an hour, we're expecting and we're also accepting non-closure in these conversations. These are big talks that we're having, and we're really excited about continuing these conversations in future iterations of this series as well. I also wanted to note, speaking of which, that this is just the beginning of a longer conversation that we're starting up again in January 2021, and it's going to run monthly on the third Wednesday at this time from 1 to 2 Pacific on the third Wednesday of every month from January to June. And we're looking to hold a series of talks that dig into some of the questions and tensions around community engaged research. And these are some of the subjects that we will be covering and exploring together. The titles and the exact themes are subject to change, just thinking about how the speakers and the community is responding to these issues, and we're hoping to be as responsive as we can. But I just wanted to get these dates and these ideas into your calendar now so that you can consider it and hopefully join us again later. Briefly looking at the agenda today in our next slide, we are going to be here. I'll ask Omar to go to our next slide, please, if we can. We're going to introduce our team. We're going to hear a little bit about CERi's work, as well as what you can expect from us over the next year. And just really excited to introduce you to the wonderful people that we're working with, and to tell you a little bit about what the heck we do here at CERi. I know that you've probably heard from many of us in different iterations over time, but you might not have a full picture about what it is our whole team does. So I'm really glad to introduce people. And now we're going to close the slides, and I'm going to invite our wonderful speakers and my lovely co-workers to unmute themselves and come onto the screen by turning their cameras on. And I'd love you all to take a moment to introduce yourselves. So what I'll ask you to do is, I'm going to ask you to please introduce yourselves, what you do with CERi, as well as where the energy in CER is right now for you. So what's your role with CERi, and also where to you is the energy in community engaged research right now? And we'll have you respond with Tara, Mahoney first, Kari Grain next, Stuart, and then Am. So a very warm welcome to Tara. Love to hear from you.
Thank you, Jackie. And thank you for organizing and planning this workshop series. It's really exciting to be a part of it. And I really love the creative energy and careful planning you've put into it. My role within CERi is I'm the research and engagement coordinator. So that means right now I'm focusing on our fellowship program. So I facilitate that. And I'm also doing my postdoc with CERi. So I'm looking at, I'm working with a community partner, Apathy is Boring, which is a youth engagement and pro-democracy organization based out of Montreal. And we're developing a program that helps to build the capacity of young people to both influence policy and run for office. And so I'm looking at what's the intersection between youth-led policy advocacy and community engaged research. So that's my postdoc. And then on the more CERi side, I run the fellowship program and contribute to some other things, which I'll talk about in a minute. To answer the question, where is the energy in community engaged research for me right now? I would say that the two things I just mentioned. So the fellowship program I'm finding to be very energizing, to be spending time with a group of young graduate students, both master's and PhD, who are embarking on their community engaged research journeys has been really amazing to just hear about the incredible work that they're doing and the energy that they have to learn about and practice community engaged research has been awesome. And then also like creating spaces for learning is always, I find, energizing when you can help facilitate people learning new things about a field they're interested in. So I would say the fellowship program and then my postdoc research. So working with Apathy is Boring and navigating the issues that come up around having a community partner and working with them and navigating timelines and goals and figuring all that out with an organization that's having real impact in the space they're working in is giving me a lot of energy right now too.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Tara. Such interesting work that I love any opportunity that I get to hear about the work that you're doing outside of CERi. It's so vital. And welcome, Kari.
Hi, thank you for having me, Jackie. I've just typed into the chat that I have a leaf blower right outside my window. He came right on time. And so if it gets too loud, please just interrupt me and you can loop back to me afterwards, all right? I am a special research associate with CERi, and I've been on board since the beginning of 2020, doing some specific research into ethics. And I'll be talking a little bit about the ethical principles of community engaged research. But on top of some of that research work that I've been doing, I've also, like Tara, been working with the fellows. And so I've been helping to design and facilitate some of the workshops. And this is really a great complement for me to some of the other work that I do, which is I'm a sessional instructor at UBC for a community-based research methods course. So it's been really complementary, the work that I've been doing. And this team has been just fantastic, the forward-thinking ways of the team. And I love how, I think that Jackie and the rest of everybody has just done a really nice job of pivoting during this time. Community engaged research and community engagement in general has, like the face of it has completely changed. And we're asking some new questions now of what it means to be together and what it means to generate knowledge together in an era of a pandemic. And I know certainly with some of the CERi fellows that they've been grappling with, well, how does this research project take place now that I'm supposed to be social distancing, or I can't be in and with the community in the way that I wanted to. So one of the things that I find exciting, or where the energy is I'm loving seeing some different communities starting to take the reins of deciding their own research ethics, of their own, like being their own gatekeepers for who can participate in doing research in their community. And one example of that, many of you might know Scott Neufeld and some of the work that he's been doing with a number of community partners in the downtown east side, putting together the Research 101, a manifesto for conducting research in the downtown east side. And I've shared that piece in the classes that I teach, and I think it's really foundational to anyone who's doing work locally. And I hope to see more of those come out in different communities soon. Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Kari. I'm just pasting the Research 101 manifesto in a link here in the chat because it's such an important document, I think, and Scott's a good friend, and really we're glad to have his contributions too. I'd love to hear from Stuart now.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much, Jackie, for bringing us together and for bringing this event together. My name is Stuart Poyntz, and I'm one of the co-directors, along with Johal, who you'll meet in a moment, of CERi. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think we could be happier with the way this project has emerged and evolved over the last year. In a time of profound crises that's reshaped all our lives, a group of people have come together who you see before you today, Jackie and Tara and Kari and Tyne and Joanna and Em, and who have done, I think, really remarkable work at putting together a set of programs and resources that are meant to raise the profile and help support community engaged research for students and faculty, and also really profoundly for community organizations, for community partners, to do our work, to do our best to try to reset the terms of relationships between community partners and research work with the university. There are a number of places where I think there's tremendous excitement in this work that I want to speak about in a moment. I come from a background working largely with young people, and by which I mean people, teenagers, people in their early 20s, in and around media democracy and culture creation projects that partner with nonprofit organizations and other kinds of organizations that aim to advance new participants in our public world, in our political world. And this really draws on and is inspired by the work that happens in community engaged research. So bringing those worlds together and trying to support those worlds is really at the center of my interest in our work at CERi and how we're developing as a project. As to the things that I think are really exciting me about where community engaged research is happening, like Tara and Kari, the graduate fellowship program that's emerged at CERi is incredibly energizing because you have a group of people from across research areas and communities in the local region across the province, really energizing and developing work. And that's inspiring to be around. But alongside that, what I'm also really excited about is the work that CERi can do with community partners to bring community partners more equitably into and in connection with the core mission of universities. Universities are important institutions, and they need to be massaged and worked to support community. And I think community engaged research and our work at CERi is really drawn to supporting and making that a reality. I'm going to have more to say about how that's happening in the second part of our contribution. But maybe on that, I'll just step back and pass the baton to Am.
Wonderful. Thanks, Stuart. Welcome, Am.
Hey, thanks a lot, Jackie, for putting this all together. It's wonderful to be in conversation with all of you today. I come into this work having been a community organizer, having worked with nonprofit organizations as a bureaucrat inside government and the political side, but I don't really define myself as something that's really changed. I've worked as a community organizer in different contexts, and I've been at SFU since December of 2010. So I'm just a few weeks away of hitting 10 years inside of the institution, which I never ever intended to do. I'm right now here at 312 Main Street, a renovated old police station that has a number of community organizations based here. So there's an administrative office of the Downtown Eastside Women's Center. The Union of BC Indian Chiefs is in this building. I have then my neighbors next door to me produced this report with urban Indigenous youth who age out of care and the lack of supports that are in place. And so there's lots of activity going on that has nothing to do with the university, but amazing community-based knowledges that are coming to the surface. And to me, being in a place doing community engagement over at Woodward's, when we've partnered directly with community, we brought things into the classroom. I kept a really distant relationship to research because I didn't want that to be the first basis of how community relationships would be built up. And now that we're so far along, this feels like a natural part of the three-legged stool in terms of the research, the mission of the university being around teaching community engagement. The research piece is so crucial, and it's been great to work with all of you in trying to sort that out and what it means to land that down in this moment as well. I'll save my remarks for later, but I'm excited in this time when we can't do public events in quite the same way, but to be able to be working on a podcast called Below the Radar with SFU's Vanity Office of Community Engagement, but also to interview some of the people who are on the panel today, but also some of our researchers in residence. I know Nick Blomley is on right now, and Namiko Kunimoto, who's an incoming researcher in residence, is joining us today. I also spent the morning with the grad fellows this morning, and that's also been a really exciting part of the work here. So I'll pass it back to Jackie.
Thanks so much, everybody. I hope that this gives a little bit of a glimpse of the wonderful and supportive community that's around us, and many of whom are in the audience today. And we're really so happy to see you joining us. I'm happy to see so many familiar faces introducing themselves in the chat. I will ask and invite Am and Stuart to mute themselves and go off camera now as we move into the second piece about what CERi has been doing over the past year in terms of building a foundation for this work. And so much of this has been through the wonderful work and the leadership and thoughtfulness of Tara, Mahoney, and Kari Grain, who've been working over the past year since CERi was first opened its doors just before 2020 began. We've kind of grown up alongside the pandemic in some ways. And they're going to share with us a little bit about some of the work that has been a focus for them over the last little while. First, Tara is going to introduce to us the community handbook that is still in progress with CERi, but offers a bit of a grounding into how CERi is intending to do work with and alongside communities. So welcome, Tara.
Thanks, Jackie. So I've been working on the handbook now for since the spring. And basically what it is when we first kind of started working with community partners, we realized that there was a kind of gap in knowledge and language and communication between us within SFU and the community partners or community organizations that were interested in community engaged research and wanted to know more about it. And we found ourselves, or at least personally, I found myself kind of stumbling of how do I communicate the value of this type of work and of this research to a community organization, knowing that, there's going to be such a variety of organizations working on different issues, and I won't be able to know all those issues well enough to speak specifically to each one. And so because we were coming up against this, we were like, okay, well, we need a resource in order to, something we can give people or give a link to a document where they could get familiarize themselves with what community engaged research is, how it's manifesting locally in the SFU and Vancouver community, and what their role could be and how they might, dip their toes in those waters if they were interested. And so that's where it really started. And then I started looking around, and it turns out that there's a lot of these like toolkits and guidebooks and handbooks out there, like a lot. And so then I was thinking, well, maybe we don't need to make one. Maybe we can just like link to, some of the excellent ones that are already out there. University of Guelph has a really good one, and McMaster and U of T and UBC, and all different versions. And so, but then, with more conversation, we realized that we wanted to kind of articulate our own unique position at SFU and 312 Main, and with the team that is behind CERi, and really got clear on there's something unique that we can offer here. And that was when we decided to really go forward with the handbook, and really sort of ground ourselves in this value of social transformation, which is a value that we founded CERi on, and we're constantly trying to figure out how does that manifest and what does that look like. And so the handbook is really trying to get at that. And so as a result, it's an introductory handbook. It's the target audience is community members, community organizations that might not know what community engaged research is at all, or they might be just learning about it, or also for grad students who are interested in exploring and learning the basics. And so it's kind of divided up into 4 sections. Why would you do community engaged research? What are the fundamentals? So the ethical principles, which are so important to the work. The research methods, so both like conventional research methods, but then also participatory methods, which is, I think, where a lot of the exciting work can happen in community. Some of the key considerations, so key questions you would want to ask yourself before embarking on a research project, and then steps to take to plan a project. Like, how would you approach a researcher, or if you're a student or researcher, how would you approach community? Those types of questions. And then there's an appendix with like templates and worksheets and things like that, like tools people can use to like facilitate meetings and those types of things. And so alongside the handbook, we're also producing a video series of just short videos that summarize each section, just as kind of little teasers to get people kind of interested, knowing that, sometimes videos is the way people learn about things through social media and other ways of communicating. So we're hoping to have the handbook done. It'll probably launch in January, realistically, where it's done now. It's just in the design process, and we're in the process of production for the first video. So we're anticipating a launch in January. And yeah, really excited about, there's been a ton of work that's gone into this from the CERi team, many rounds of edits and checking with community and scholars and getting people's input. And so I'm really excited to launch it. And the other thing I forgot to mention is we highlight different community engaged research projects from SFU in the handbook. So there's little kind of vignettes and stories of what it looks like here in Vancouver. And I was just so inspired by the work that's already happening in SFU and how communities have come together with government or, other bodies around the region to really advance issues using research, which is, what I find most inspiring about working at CERi.
Thanks, Tara. There's a lot of such interesting work happening at SFU, and it's really, I see the handbook as something that that brings together a lot of the questions that have been, I think, otherwise happening on the side of people's desks or happening in conversations that are so germane to the work, but perhaps not in a centralized space. So I'm so excited to see that published. We're now going to hear from Kari about the ethical principles that she'd recently published. And those are also, I think, a really important guiding framework for people and for us to ground ourselves in our values and to think about how we do CER.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to add that I've had the opportunity to read through and give some feedback to Tara and some of the other team that have been working on that handbook. And it is just a fantastic resource. And I'm really, really excited to see how it gets taken up and particularly how community organizations are able to use it and use some of the tools that are offered in it. Once again, if it gets too loud in the background, just let me know and I'll mute myself and move on. But so the ethical principles for community engaged research, I think the research for me really began with doing a fairly large scale lit review where I looked through a lot of community engaged research articles and books that are taking place, that have been published across many disciplines. Because one of the interesting things about community engaged research is that it is interdisciplinary. And a lot of different articles had identified key ideas, key principles for how to do ethical work, ethical community engaged research. One thing I want to highlight or flag is that if you talk to a graduate student, and certainly when I was doing my PhD, or certainly near the beginning of it, when I heard the word ethics in research, what I thought about was the institutional ethics board that I had to get through. I thought about paperwork and I thought about going through this really detailed form that I knew I thought about it as a hurdle I had to jump over to be able to do my PhD. And so for me, this is really moving away from that and thinking about or acknowledging the fact that just because you pass your institutional ethics review of your research does not make your research ethical from a community engaged standpoint. And I suppose what I did was distill many, there were so many different takes on what these ethical principles are, and in alignment with some of the key pillars of what we do in CERi, I came up with about 10. 10 is a nice clean number. And what those are, I'll kind of briefly give you a snapshot of what those are. But just so you know, this is a resource also that's meant to be usable. It's on our website now. And I want to give a shout out to Tyne because she did a beautiful job of organizing some fairly academic jargon and pieces into something really readable and nice to look at. So good job, Tyne. And so you can download on our website. You'll see a tab. I can actually paste it in there one moment. I'm going to put the link to the actual PDF of the 10 different, I've put it in the chat there now, of the 10 different principles. But you can also access it through the website, and you can download even if you're just interested in one of those principles because it bears quite prominently in your work, you can just download that one. In any case, each of the principles that we go through contains a 1 or 2 paragraph overview of what that principle means. It contains a tips and considerations. So in that case, it's a lot of key points from the literature. And what I did was cite the research and literature for each of those because I wanted people to be able to go to other sources and be able to track down where that came from. Where did that notion come from? And then finally, finally, questions to ask yourself. So as you're going through a community engaged research project, what are some of those key questions you need to be asking pertaining to that specific ethical principle? So just as a snapshot, the ethical principles that I'll go through, you might have opened it already if you did in the chat. But the first one is harm and risk reduction. And really, this is foundational to anybody. I think, this is one of the main ones that most of the readings I looked at talked about. And really the Hippocratic oath that people practice in medicine is do no harm. And that's what this is premised upon. And the second one is community participation. So we divided it into community participation, which is number 2, and then community benefit, because those are two different things. One is that we truly engage community in all aspects. And it's important here that we don't just, integrate it at one moment in the research project, or certainly what we think about as the ideal form of community engaged research. And that participation takes place at each step, from the inception of the research question in many cases, all the way through to the methods and the people who are being talked to for the project, or who are the participants. And then importantly, the analysis and dissemination. And then community benefit, which is number 3. And that really, we are thinking about, as within CERi, we're thinking quite deeply on how do we consider what reciprocity means, and how do we consider what is fair compensation for communities' labor when they do take part in community engaged research projects. And there are a lot of complexities around issues of money and reciprocity, which I won't get into right now, but that's a big one. And then an action orientation, which means that community engaged research contributes to change. It contributes to social change, advocacy work, policy work. And number 5 is an examination and active redistribution of power. So not only is a researcher meant to look at their own identity and power relations vis-a-vis the community they're working with, but also they're committed to changing those power relations and trying to create a more equitable society. Am I doing okay for time? Can I still go through the other 4, I think?
Yep, just about 3 minutes, if that's okay.
Oh, great. Yeah, no problem. And then number 6 is a fairly common one that you'll hear in most ethical articles, anything that you read around ethics, which is anonymity, confidentiality, and privacy. I won't get into that too much. Number 7 is communication, transparency, and trust. And I can't emphasize enough how important relationships are. And you could almost, number 9 is actually a focus on relationships. And many of these, it's hard to disentangle them from one another. But it's quite, one of the things we're teaching the CERi fellows is, okay, what is your communication plan for how you will ask your partner organization about what they hope to get out of this. At what points along the way are you checking in? How are they asking you or expecting you to share the findings with them? So some of those pieces are quite important. Attention to context. We have talked about, I mentioned that, with the research manifesto for doing research in the downtown East Side, that's just one example of where people do really innovative and fantastic community engaged research. But there are hundreds and thousands of other communities that could also, maybe they don't have something as formal or as, something that has already been created. But it would be worth considering for any community engaged researcher. Does this community have a set of ethical principles that they want me to go through before I do work with them? Like, what are their expectations, and how can they be gatekeepers in this process? So that context of what constitutes good research and how do you come to research in a good way, that is going to vary. It's going to vary in different communities. And then focus on relationships, I kind of spoke to already. And finally, this piece sometimes gets forgotten, but that is the collaborative analysis and dissemination process. So when I did my community engaged research project for my PhD, it was with a community in Uganda. And I talked to them at the very beginning about how do we want to disseminate this research. And we did write an article together in the Journal of Experiential Education. But for them, they also really wanted to have a big party. And they wanted to have a dance party and have like the local high school dance troupe there. And we ate together, and the participants shared some of their photography. So for them, it was all about celebration. And that is a legitimate and much more fun form of dissemination than an academic journal article. So those are 10 of the principles. And I hope that those of you who are out there are able to just have a look at it through the CERi website, and feel free to download it and use it as you like. I'll pass it back to you, Jackie.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Kari. It's such an important, I think, framing to think about and to apply to this work, the ethical principles. I really appreciate you sharing that with me. It's very live in all of the conversations that I'm having right now. So thanks so much. I'll have you go off camera for a little while until we come back into the Q&A, which we are going to do in about 10 minutes. So I will paste an invitation for folks who are listening and reflecting on this and how this lands with them. We'd really love to hear your questions and your reflections in the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom browser there. But in the meantime, we're going to hear briefly from Am and Stuart, and you can decide which order you'd like to speak in, about where we are headed with CERi. So what we can expect to see from CERi in the next year, and also how people can stay connected and potentially get involved with this work.
Great, thanks so much, Jackie. I'll just start with 5 minutes, and Stuart will jump in on everything I won't be able to get to. I think one of the things I want to say is that CERi is a special initiative of the Vice President Research Office. So we have a set amount of funding for 3 or 4 years to get this off the ground. And certainly for Stuart, all of us on the team, our advisory board, to do this work for 3 or 4 years and then to go away like, project is done, isn't really the end game we're looking for. We really want this to be established as a permanent infrastructure at the universities to support scholars, grad students, community members. I think as a university at SFU, where we've done a great job in terms of advancing community engagement broadly, particularly through the external relations portfolio, trying to see where community engagement can fulfill a scholarly capacity and to build up that infrastructure. So all of the parts that we do well at SFU historically, and I think presently, will actually be integrated in a much more cohesive way that builds all of these things up. As somebody who's not a professor, my other work is in external relations, that to me, it's been a fascinating experience to be able to bring the work that we've been doing into the classroom, but also now on a research basis as well. I think that we're excited about new researchers in residence coming in. Namiko Kunimoto's joining us from Ohio State New Year. We have an artist in residence, Justine Chambers, who comes from the contemporary dance community. Her work overlaps into the visual arts and gets into social questions around bodies and policing. So really excited about the research agendas that people are bringing here, and the proximity within a context. Now, of course, we are this project got launched in late January, and in the pandemic context, I think it raises a lot of questions about the university, its values, sometimes its outdated structures. We can be a really dumb, clumsy institution sometimes in responding to emergencies that are happening on the ground. So the questions that are being asked of the university by people outside of it in terms of its responsiveness are incredibly important, in how we choose to respond and to land down the new questions that are emerging related to ethical questions in community engaged research in a pandemic context. What are the new questions that researchers, communities are asking us to come forward with, have changed and altered our own direction? And I think we're going to need to be incredibly responsive in that regard in terms of what our communities are going to need coming out of a pandemic context. I think another piece, we haven't really chatted about this internally as a team, so I'm just throwing this out there in public. One of the things that I don't think that we do well as an institution is to recognize good community engaged research work that's being done. We really ought to have awards for senior scholars doing community engaged, emerging scholars, grad students, and also to award community-based work, community engaged research that's happening out in the communities outside of the community. I think if we recognize and give visibility to people doing this work, it becomes much more a mainstream part of the institution. Huge questions around equity, diversity, inclusion within this work, and I think important new questions that are being brought to us from communities. I think those are going to be really important parts for us to engage in. I'm going to pass it over to Stuart here.
Thanks, Sam. And just to say, in our little our own chat, Tara has commented on this, but I think I love the idea of community engaged awards. So let me pick up on some of the things Am has talked about. One of the ideas that stands behind some of Am's comments is the way we at CERi have come to think about our work and our special imprint that we can make on the field of community engaged research. It is a large and diverse field. Having said that, it's also a field that is deeply concerned with transformation and change. Thinking about community engaged research in terms of supporting transformation and social change, where we can help to initiate and support those projects, is really central to how we are thinking about our work and how we're thinking about our work with communities. And with that in mind, there's a number of projects that are coming up in 2021 and beyond that I want to share with you, because they highlight how we're trying to think about how this work can help us to understand processes of decolonization within the institution, within universities, and in our collaboration with community partners. And with that in mind, one of the developments that we've been working on is a project that helps us to understand where Indigenous-led research, community-engaged research is happening at the university. And that's both by faculty and students, and involving a range of community and partners. So foregrounding how Indigenous-led research is really changing the field and altering notions of what transformation means is really at the center of our work. With that in mind, we're also hosting a community engaged research symposium next March. And this is really looking at this field of community engaged research in times of crises. There are a range of social crises that are upon us, including climate change, including the opioid crisis, including the pandemic, including homelessness. These are resonating across the province and indeed across our country. And so this symposium is really about foregrounding how crises center and change our thinking about research work and collaborations between community partners and university researchers. So please look for that, and we'll certainly be sending out news about that. As Kari mentioned, we're also really concerned about the way money plays into and can sometimes muddy relationships of reciprocity and equity that we're trying to generate in supporting community engaged research work. And so we're developing a real deep dive into thinking and understanding how it is we can make recommendations to the institution on creating less clunky, more equitable ways of recognizing the role of money in supporting community engaged research without burdening community groups themselves with those relationships. And that really means changing how money is distributed from universities to partner groups. We're working on the development of a much larger international conference that's meant to highlight changes and movements in community engaged research. And again, I want to bring to the forefront here that we've been talking with people in the field, within community groups, folks who have been working in universities and in institutes like CERi at other universities over the past 8 months or so. all with the aim of bringing together some of the most interesting thinking and work on how transformation and change are informing how it is that community engaged research operates. We're going to bring those people together along with many others, we hope, in an international conference early in 2022. That conference had been planned for fall of 2021, but our circumstances have changed. And so this is an opportunity, we hope, to really put a mark in the field about how community engaged research is shifting and changing, moving away from certain ideas of social change that are attached to perhaps notions like social innovation, and moving towards other deeper ideas around structural change that can be supported by community engaged research. These are rich and important conversations and actions that can change how universities operate in cities, in regions, and across the country. And we're hoping it's both of interest to you and that some of you who are part of our audience today will come with us and be part of those projects, those events.
Thanks so much, Stuart. This is a really exciting moment, I think, especially when we think about what all needs to be transformed and how we can all play a role in this. And we really, really hope to meet you in person at some point. I'm going to now invite the other panelists, Kari, Tara, and Am, to come back into the screen. You can turn your cameras back on. We're going to go into a quick question period here. And one of the important questions, hello, Benny puppy, you are so adorable. I would feel, animals in Zoom, just one of the best things in the world. I think this is such an important question. This comes from someone who's asking about their own research project and how it surfaces a taboo that in universities there's not a lot of language or tools to address it head on. They say my CBPR research, which refers to community-based participatory action research, is about poverty discrimination in Canadian universities. It's so hard. Social class is so taboo. I'm working multiple jobs, not just to survive, but to be able to honor my underclass sister research partners. Every day is a fight to address classism in Canadian universities and in Canada. I built a table. How do I survive this? How do we get power to care about social class? How do we get social class into EDI? Is there decolonization without addressing social class? Really curious from any of you who might wish to share some reflections on this. And again, just to the panelists, so that we can get to as many questions as we're able to. Not everybody has to jump in on every question, but folks who have thoughts on this would love to hear them.
I don't mind offering a first response. I really, believe it's Elaine. To Elaine, I really want to thank you for this really rich question and intervention. I think that social class and questions of economic structures and inequity that are, and the conditions of inequity that are produced are absolutely part of the work of transformation that community engaged research can help to support and engage. The short answer to your question would be that I don't think that one can speak about social transformation without recognizing the power of class. And we've certainly tried to bring that into various programs and work where that arises. What we've also tried to recognize is that the registers of power that are affecting communities in times of crises are complex. And it's really important to make space to allow a number of participants and analysis in thinking about those power relations to come to the fore. And it's in that vein, Elaine, that we've really been thinking about this question of transformation as a guiding impulse in thinking about where the field of community engaged research is moving. We're not attempting in any sense to exclude registers of power like class that need to be addressed. In fact, what we're doing in foregrounding transformation is trying to open up a space where that input and that kind of exchange can feed each other through graduate research, through community partnerships, so on and so forth.
I was just going to add one piece, and I think it's really important to look at the university as a whole from its research processes, but also its functions as an institution. When we look at who's contracted out as staff at the university, We're talking about the cleaning staff, the security, and the wages that are below a living wage here. So there's all sorts of discrepancies between what we purport to be as an institution and the way things land down on the ground, and raises a lot of important social questions that I think that are movable, and that we can actually through research advance a better way of working overall.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. I think I don't have like a clear idea on this yet, but you're kind of alluding to it in your question, Elaine. I think it's Elaine or Elena. Around what's the connection between community engaged research and community researchers and precarious academic workers, and how do we disrupt those cycles and structures of exploitation that exist within the university itself. Like I said, I don't have a good answer for that, but I think it's an interesting line of inquiry. And one of the things I'm going to be working on in the new year through CERi is exploring this idea of a postdoc collective, and we're just right now figuring out what are the issues that something like that would be rooted in. And I think that this is will be really pertinent to that, just because when you're an early career academic, or you're an RA or a TA, you do feel that weight of exploitation on you, along with all the other precarious workers at the university. So I think making that more visible is really important, and presents some interesting opportunities for us. And then I think another part of that's related to some of the work CERi's doing, that Am and Stuart could probably speak to more because they're working on it more closely, is just the tenure track and promotion stuff that we're doing around, the institution formally recognizing community engaged research. Because right now, if you do any kind of community engagement work as an academic at the university, that's actually a cost to you. That's a tax on your career, because you have to do it outside of all the other time that you're teaching and researching. And then if you co-author a paper with 6 other authors who are community members, that's looked upon as watering down your academic credibility and things like that. And that all needs to be flipped on its head. So we're doing work in that area as well to try and change the institutional logic around that stuff.
Thanks so much. I also wanted to note, before we get into our final question of the session and start to wrap up, I really appreciate this question about how do we get social class into EDI, and particularly how do we expand the work of and the understanding of EDI to include a class analysis, which I think so far is often lacking, particularly when EDI rests solely in issues of representational politics without addressing power as it plays out with regard to class. And so I think that that's where there is a place to focus the work. But in terms of yes, how do we create a better care practice around this work? How do you survive this as a researcher? That's a huge part of where we are hoping to work with our fellowship program. I'm planning a workshop next week with the fellows that is looking to explore the articulation of an active care practice, not only for researchers, but how that can be in mutual benefit to the communities that people are working in. The final question that is somewhat related, but brings us into another question about how do we bring community into the university? So Nick asks, while it's fantastic for SFU faculty to be brought into CERi as researchers and residents, can we imagine community members and activists being given the same opportunity?
I don't have a short or quick answer for that. I think that what we've been trying to do and what Remaking the Table as a seminar series opens up for us is ways of working with the community that are supportive, that are engaging, that allow research projects to emerge. In designing our space at 312 Main, which of course we're not able to welcome people to at this stage, it really is a space that's been intentionally designed to enable a hospitable welcome to community members. And by that, I really mean that it's flexible. It doesn't have all the kind of signs and bells and whistles that SFU's other campuses have. It is a welcoming and open and really, I guess I want to say, generous space. These are efforts on our, in what we think to create openings in response to Nick's question. And I think we are continuing to learn about how to involve community researchers in our work and in the university's work more readily. I don't think we imagine ourselves as having a flat answer to that, but we are trying in a number of ways to open up those doorways.
I would just add to that in the way that I answered to Nick in the Q&A, in the same way that we have a researchers in residence program or an artist in residence program. We very well could develop an activist in residence program. There's models from other universities. I know that when I was doing community organizing work, it would have been great to have 4 months in a space to be building out research that was meant to be part of advocacy work, being around graduate students and professors in the help of that work. So I think that's something, we would be in a position of taking action on. And I think it has a lot of value. There's something that Barbara put into the conversation to the panelists, but not to everyone. But I just want to read this out loud. Barbara is on with this right now, but she's a very prominent scholar in this area, has worked decades. But one of the things she said in the comment is, as scholars, we should always be thinking of community engagement as a method of teaching, learning, and research that is distinguished from other methods by the inclusion of community perspectives, ideas, analysis, and expectation. And it's in that integration in all those aspects of the university that community engagement can actually follow through in a proper sense. It tends to be disparate and messy in how it rolls out with not a real sense of the impact it can have on community. And certainly if we take a longer term approach and set up structures that support that level of integration, we're going to have a lot more impact in the short and long term.
Thank you so much. This gives us so much to think about, and particularly thinking about how do we move towards an integrated practice in this work that moves beyond the very rigid and sometimes binary ways that we've been taught to think and act within the institution. I want to thank all of our speakers so much for sharing your thoughts and perspectives with us today. And thank you hugely to everybody here who's attended and who's contributed to such rich discussion. The comments and the questions will give us so much to think about, and we really hope that you will join us again in January for the future sessions in the Remaking the Table series. In the meantime, I really hope that everybody has a wonderful day, and we're going to say goodbye for now. So we will see you again soon, and we hope you take good care. Thank you so much.